Welcome to video 10-2, where I wrap up chapter 10, starting with transfer pricing and then later talking about a special type of responsibility center that we didn't cover earlier. So first of all, transfer pricing. So transfer pricing is when there are internal prices set for inputs that pass from one production department to another. So we have a ladder production department that requires one of its inputs is produced by another production department in the company. And by literally charging a price, at least on the company books, we can better help hold each cost center or profit manager accountable for those costs he or she controls, and not hold them accountable for the costs he or she does not control. So we're moving the costs from one production department to another, and charging and allowing revenue through that price as well to go to the producing production department, the earlier production department in that chain. So yeah, we're talking about chains of production departments. Now I'll refer to them as the selling departments and buying departments. Now there are a variety of schemes for setting transfer prices. You can use market price either for the selling department or for the buying department. So for example, the market price that the selling department could sell its good on the open market, the external market outside the firm, or the market price that the buying department could buy that good outside the firm, that input. We could take the selling department's full cost, including absorption, all the overhead that gets absorbed. We could also build in some sort of markup, say 10% of overhead extra as markup. So you take the full cost of direct costs, then you take the full costs of overhead, and then you add on top of that 10% markup from the cost of overhead or something like that, or a certain set amount, or a percent of overall costs, or a set of direct costs, something like that, some sort of markup in addition. We could remove the fixed overhead, especially fixed costs. These are just some examples here, and the last one is the most interesting one to us, and what we're going to spend the rest of the time on transfer prices talking about is negotiated price. We could simply have the two managers, the selling department manager and the buying department manager, sit in a room as like a cage match, and together they'll come up with the right price, the price that they're going to pay. So the downsides of this are that negotiated prices might be influenced by some things that are not economic in nature. Maybe one manager has a personality that's more disagreeable than the other one, and fights harder for his or her benefit. Perhaps one manager is the CEO's niece, and she has some social standing in the firm that the other manager does not. The transfer price might be swayed in a way that is entirely detached from the economic reality that the price is supposed to be representing. And so negotiated prices can have the disadvantage of having these external factors affect where they fall within this range of possible negotiated prices. So that's what we're going to do. Is honestly, we're not going to analyze what the negotiated price will be, but I would like you to be able to tell me what the maximum price will be and what the minimum price will be, the ceiling and the floor for the negotiations. So the buyer sets the maximum price, right? You've been buyers for lots of things before. You go to the market and you get to say, I'm not going to pay that. You have the right of rejection. So the maximum price that you're going to pay, you can set that. The seller is setting the floor, the seller department, and they're going to involve the seller's variable costs and their opportunity costs. This is going to look a lot like Chapter 3 when we had special orders, which was variable cost per unit plus the share of fixed costs that each unit had. That was the price floor for our special order decisions in Chapter 3. Very similar, fixed costs over quantity of the order plus the variable cost per unit. So that this F over Q gives us the fixed cost per unit that we need. And so those two together give us a per unit price, the minimum price. Now, the F here is only opportunity cost in this case. At least that's what we're going to say, and that typically is the case, because these two, the buyer and the seller here, are from the same firm, and if your seller department, the earlier department in the chain, doesn't yet have the fixed cost equipment and rights and licensing agreements and whatever necessary for the downstream department, why not? The two are made for each other. They were founded with the idea that they're going to be supporting each other in a chain of production. So very unlikely that they're going to have additional fixed costs that they have to incur beyond opportunity costs, which means that these are products that couldn't be sold on the external market because the seller is selling them to the buyer. So the minimum amount the seller will will settle on for a negotiated price under normal economic conditions anyway is variable cost per unit plus the share of opportunity cost from losing the sales in the external market that each of the products, each of the units that's being sold needs to bear. Okay, so we have to calculate, as a result of that, lost contribution margin. If we remember back to chapter 3, we really focused on contribution margin here. So you have your variable cost, of course, yes, but then when we're talking about this opportunity cost, you're trying to get total contribution margin lost divided by the quantity of units that we're selling, and that will give us this number right here. That's the opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is lost contribution margin. When we don't sell this in the external market, we're losing the contribution margin that could have been earned. Now, contribution margin, of course, is revenue minus variable costs, and so we have revenue minus variable cost. In this case, we're talking about variable costs per unit on the external market, and so we need to include any variable costs that are specific to external sales. This often happens. Often, when we're talking about transfer pricing, you will have a category of variable costs, which really you only incur when you're shipping to customers across the country, or you have to sell externally, some sort of sales cost oftentimes. You wouldn't have to incur that when you're selling within the company. You don't have to make that sale. It's not a hard sell. You're expecting each other to work together within the company. So you wouldn't include this typically. This number in orange right here is the V we're talking about right here. But when we're trying to get the F here to get total contribution margin that's been lost by selling internally instead of externally, we have to say, well, we actually would incur all these variable costs here, the 10 and the 5, on those external sales. So we have 40 minus 15 gives us $25 unit contribution margin. Okay, now in this example, we have 1,000 units required by the buying department. We have excess capacity of only 430 units. So we are losing sales from the difference between those two, between 1,000 and 430. 570 lost sales in units times the contribution margin per sale. It gives us a total opportunity cost, total lost contribution margin of $14,250. Okay, given that we need 1,000 units, for the buying department, it requires 1,000 units. Our opportunity cost per unit is $14.25. So you add this together with our variable costs. Let me go back. This is F in the equation, total loss contribution margin, and this is the quantity required, the Q. And then back here again, I said this is the V we're talking about with internal sale. We're only talking about the variable manufacturing cost, not anything that's only on external sales. So yeah, we have this plus this. This is the F over Q. It's the whole F over Q term. All right, $24.25 is our price floor. And our price ceiling was determined by the buying department. Externally, they could just buy it for $35. If we're going to try to negotiate higher than that, they'll just buy it from the external market. And there you go. So the negotiated price should, economically speaking, fall between these two. Got about $10, 75-cent range that you could negotiate. The two departments will sit down and negotiate. If the two were reversed somehow, if somehow we did the calculations and the price ceiling is lower than the price floor, that's never good. And it means that economically speaking, no transfer price could be negotiated because the buying department is going to say, well, if we go any higher where you want it to be, then it makes more sense for us to just buy it outside the firm. In which case you start to wonder yourself, why do we have both production departments in here? Maybe we aren't good at one of them. And the selling department will say, well, if you don't pay this much for us, we're losing money on every single one that we produce for you, and that's not very fair to us. It will make us look worse than we otherwise should be. We will not be. We will be held accountable for and responsible for costs that we're not incurring, and you won't be held accountable for costs that you are causing to be incurred on your behalf in our department. Let's move on to the next idea, the idea of return on investment and residual income, because we need to talk about investment centers. So in addition to the very top flow chart I showed you, in addition to the idea of do you control revenue and do you control costs, you also have a different style of decision that you can make, which is an investment decision. The question of do you have the ability to modify or start, modify, or end capital projects or capital assets? The idea that can you build? Do you have the authority to build a new restaurant, a new manufacturing plant, and so on and so forth? And if that is the case, then you need to have additional accounting measures, additional responsibility assigners for the responsibility of that decision right. So there are two that we're going to talk about: ROI, return on investment, and residual income. And the two work together well. Residual income has a key weakness return on investment has a key weakness that residual income helps fix. And residual income on its own often is not enough. So usually you see either ROI or a combination of ROI and residual income. You often will also see economic value added as a special form of residual income. You can't use that word unless you put the trademark after it, though. I think it's just some fancy way of defining it. It's like kind of silly, to be honest, but it's just a type of residual income is the idea. Return on investment is very simply the return or profit over the investment amount. Now, you can define this a few different ways. I've seen it defined several different ways. You could have the investment amount be the assets, the average assets. You start with you average out what the assets were. The asset amount was from at the beginning of the period until the asset amount at the end of the period, and that's the denominator. So that's the assets that you've invested in the company, or in this project, this new plant, production plant, this new store, whatever the investment decision was. And then, you're using that as the denominator over or underneath, the return you received from that investment, the profit from that investment. And that gives you the ROI, the return on investment. Now, the great thing about this is that it makes comparability a breeze. And that's not all. No, sorry. Had to say it. So you can compare different projects, different departments, different companies, different industry, all sorts of things, because you have the return expressed in a percentage form. And that's just telling you what you're getting back from a dollar investment in this thing. It is eminently comparable. You can compare all sorts of things based on this. It's very powerful in that sense. So oftentimes you will have investments that are great and small, and you want to know whether they're good investments regardless of their size. And this is a great equalizer because, the smaller investments will have a smaller denominator, and so you would expect less profit from them. And so your ROI will be scaled to the amount of investment required. Now, the problem is that when you use ROI on its own, sometimes managers receive a perverse incentive from that, in the sense that, now what we mean by perverse incentive is we are talking about usually it's used as a term for when there is a particularly glaring mismatch between what the agent, in this case the manager, is motivated to do, is incentivized to do, and what the principal, the firm in this case, would prefer the manager do. And so here, the problem with ROI is that oftentimes a manager, if the manager has any decent skill and makes good decisions with this decision right, this investment decision center right that has been endowed to him or her, then he or she will be able to get a relatively high ROI in a given period. Well, at that point, the manager is now disincentivized to accept any project lower than that high ROI. Now, the company might want every project that is above a certain ROI to be invested in, if at all possible. But there's that you get this donut hole where it's a project that is below what the manager's current department or current ROI is, but above what the firm would prefer, and those projects often get turned down by the manager, or at least the manager is incentivized to turn them down, because they would dilute the manager's ROI. They'd reduce it. So let's assume a manager has a bonus when his or her department has a return an ROI of 17%. Now the firm's cost of capital is 12%. That means that is another way of saying that is the firm's minimal ROI. It prefers 12% or more, because that's the cost of the capital for the firm in general, and it needs to return at least that much. Now, currently, this manager has a department rate of return of 21%. Well, that's above 17%, looking good. There are a few options. 3 different projects that the manager could non-exclusive, meaning that he could invest in all 3 of these projects. He could build a warehouse, build a production plant, build a restaurant. I don't know, 3 different things. And they have these various ROIs. Okay, so we have number 1 and number 3 are slam dunks. Number 1, don't take it. ROI is 10%. That's below the firm's cost of capital and below the manager's cost of current ROI. Project 3, slam dunk. Take it for sure. Everyone wants this one. The manager wants to increase his ROI. The firm says, yes, it's above 12%, so yeah, we're making good money on that. Project 2 is the one that hits the donut hole. Its ROI is 18.2%. Now, the manager is induced by the ROI metric not to invest in this, because that would reduce, this 18.2% would reduce his 21%. It puts him closer to this 17%, which is the trigger for his bonus. So he's likely to turn project 2 down. Whereas the firm says it's above 12%. We're making good money on this. We're making $1.5 million, and it's an 18% ROI here. That's good money. That $1.5 million is good money for our investment of $8.25 million. So the firm would prefer the manager say yes to it if the firm were making the decision. But because the firm is so decentralized, as this big firm must be, it has endowed this manager with this decision right, and the responsibility accounting, the ROI, by which it is measuring his performance, is now incentivizing him to run counter to what the firm would prefer if decision rights weren't decentralized. All right, so this is why oftentimes, or sometimes anyway, return on an investment gets paired with residual income. Some secondary requirement for either investments or bonuses or incentives of some kind. What else do we say? Not just ROI, but also it has to have a certain type of residual income. All right, so what does residual income mean? It means the amount of money left over after you have paid for the cost of capital, the firm's cost of capital, the general hurdle rate that we're talking about right here. So we have invested this amount, and it has to pay back this percent. And so within the parentheses here is the amount required for this investment to break even. And anything above and beyond that is residual income. Profit from the investment minus this amount to break even, basically, based on the cost of capital for the firm, gives us our residual income. Now, this is not comparable in the same way that ROI is. It's a dollar figure. So big departments will have big residual incomes. Small departments will have small residual income. You've lost that comparability because it's now scaled by investment amount. But what this does is it does measure in absolute dollars the benefit to the firm of the project. So because this 10% ROI in project 1 is below the 12%, we have a negative residual income. Because these two have a higher ROI than the cost of capital, we have a positive residual income. That is to say, because we're dividing the profit, which is right here, over the investment amount in ROI. So we're dividing the profit over the investment amount. The ROI, if it's higher than the cost of capital, will yield a positive residual income. Just the way it works. If you don't quite make sense of that, you look at those equations a few more times and try to run through the logic of it. Residual income tells you in dollar amounts the comparison between this and this, kind of multiplied by the size of the investment. And so if now the manager has this residual income incentive also hanging over him, now he's more induced to accept this project number 2 because look, I can increase my residual income. Now my bonus is not just based on ROI, but also on some residual income measure. I can increase residual income with this project too. I'm going to be more likely to take it on, which is what the firm wants to do. So you pair these together, and often they're a powerful tool for reducing the perverse incentives with this investment decision that we have decentralized and given to these managers on the outskirts of the firm. And that's all I have. Bye.